Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the University of Illinois in the private well class. And thanks for coming to our webinar today on financing options for private well owners. I want to say that this program and our private well class program are all funded through the Rural Community Assistance Partnership with funding by USDA through a grant for technical assistance and training to private well owners. And we're at the State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, which, if you're not familiar with, is one of the state scientific surveys. And with that, I do want to say if you are a sanitarian in Illinois, you can get LEHP credit for this. And if you are a NEHA member, you can also get CE credit through NEHA for this webinar today. And you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org. I think Katie has put a couple of handouts in your GoToWebinar box that have some of that information, and you can work with her to get your CE guide, CEs related to that. I also do want to mention that this is the first time we put this presentation on, and it's a little different animal than some of the other things that we've done. I'm a groundwater hydrologist, and I work, know a lot about source water and groundwater and geology and those things. Funding is not my forte, so I've leaned on some other folks here for this. And I also want to, again, mention that this is part of the privatewellclass.org program, which is a much broader scoped help and educational tool for well owners and those that support well owners. There's a 10-lesson class and some other resources available to you and anyone nationwide. It's all free, thanks to funding from EPA. And as far as our webinar goes today, hopefully I've answered a lot of the questions. Most of the questions we got for the webinar today were related to financing, and I think I've covered what we know. And it's not going to make everybody happy, I'll tell you that right away, because there just isn't, in some areas, a lot of support to provide financing or funding to private well owners. You're pretty much on your own. But for a lot of folks, they want to be private well owners because they want to be independent, and so it's a double-edged sword in that respect. So there's two of us on this webinar today. Myself, I'm a groundwater hydrologist, as I mentioned, and Katie Buckley, who is our outreach specialist, and she is monitoring the chat and question box on GoToWebinar, and we'll take your questions during as we go through today. If I say something that you question or you have questions and I don't answer them, you can ask at the end. We'll field the questions that we got in advance first, at least some of those, and then at the very end, I'll pull over a Google Doc that Katie and I are sharing, and if we get any questions today, we'll try to answer those. So that'll be at the very end. I think the last slide says additional questions, so hang on for that. As far as the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, if you're not familiar with RCAP, you really should be, whether you're a well owner or a professional that works with well owners. RCAP is a national partnership of 6 nonprofits. Their headquarters is based in D.C. It's the RCAP National Office, but they're known by different names. In the upper Midwest and the Plains, it's a Midwest Assistance Program, MAP. Out west, it's RCAC, which is the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. And you can see the different names here and the states they represent. Together, they cover the entire country, as well as Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And they're an organization that solely exists to provide help in rural areas and for small and underserved communities around the country. A lot of their staff are licensed water or wastewater operators. They also have, each region has at least one, or if not more, folks who are well experts. And so we have this program is really built on 2 pieces. At the University of Illinois, we do the private well class program, which is the online part, so we can reach everyone through online resources and that sort of thing. And RCAP is doing the boots on the ground effort, putting on workshops in various states, both for sanitarians, drillers, other professionals, as well as for well owners. And also, which I'll mention at the very end, there's they go out and do assessments of private wells to help a well owner understand what their risks might be, what vulnerabilities they might have. And it's a one-on-one way for you as a well owner to get more information and to better understand maybe the geology or the issues that might be related to your well individually. And I say that because you know, I've sampled literally thousands of wells myself in Illinois, and every well is different, every situation is different, every well is unique in its own way. So rarely do you see a number of wells that are identical and have the same issues and the same source water issues or topography issues or land use issues. So having an assessment done is a great way to better understand your well if you are a well owner. So a little about the water survey. We're unique in that we're the only one in the country. So every state has a state geological survey and a natural history survey. Illinois also has a state water survey. We're all sister agencies. And in Illinois, we're under one department at the University of Illinois, which is called the Prairie Research Institute. So we've been around for over 100 years. We were a state agency until 2006, until we moved to the U of I. We've been involved in water quality in private wells and understanding issues related to those and public health issues since the 1890s. So we house the state's well logs. We have a public service lab that provides sampling to well owners in the state, and we do a lot of applied research to look at water quality and water quantity issues, which you know, a lot of my work has been involved in glacial aquifers in Illinois. So I understand a lot more about those things than I do some of the other issues related to bedrock wells and things like that. But I've certainly been involved in both. Just as an example, in our records, we maintain files for every community in the state, every well they've drilled, every time they've had a pump test or an aquifer test or anything else done. And as you go through those records, sometimes you run across things like this, which was a study that was done to look at a typhoid outbreak in Pana, Illinois in 1916. And so all these folks who got typhoid, they mapped it and figured out in the end that it was the Pana Ice Cream Company, which is listed here in the middle with the arrows, where the source of this probably came from. And so it's you know, to me this is really cool, and it speaks a lot to the history and what we've been involved in here for many years, and it's you know, what's allowed us to, as an agency, to, you know, be able to provide like the resources we have for the private well class. As a well owner, you're not regulated in 99% of the country. You're on your own. Once a well's drilled and installed, there are no rules for testing. There are no rules for maintaining your well. In most places, there's no rule that says you can't drink water that's contaminated. You're truly on your own. And so what you need to understand is that your well water can be the best tasting and safest looking in the world, but many of the contaminants that are a problem, like arsenic, which is naturally occurring, you can't see, taste, or have a smell. So you really need to test your well regularly, and that's the one message that, you know, we promote in every webinar, and this slide ends up in every webinar we do because it's really important. I grew up in an old hand-dug well. It was only 14 feet deep. Now I live in the Champaign-Urbana area, and I live on a community water supply. So I pay $40 to $50 a month to have safe, clean water delivered to my home with adequate pressure. As a well owner, you're responsible for doing all of those things on your own for your own system. And so that $40 or $50 a month is spread out over 150,000 residents, probably, you know, a good 40,000 homes or customers. And so that allows a community water supply to have a licensed operator, to do regular testing, to repair pipes that break, all those things that you as a well owner would be responsible for your system. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. And, you know, our class, the actual class, not this webinar, the 10 lessons that you can get online are really about why you need to understand where your water's coming from. So you need to know, you know, what kind of well you have, whether it's bedrock, sand and gravel, or an old dug well, or a bored well, where your pump set, what kind of geology you have, you know, whether there's naturally occurring contaminants. We have areas in every state where there may be one kind of contaminant or another. You know, there's several areas in Illinois that have high arsenic in an aquifer, and you need to be aware of those things if you live there. So what we are trying to do with this program is, one, convince you why it's important to sample your well regularly, and two, give you enough information that you can ask better questions of those local sources of information, like your county or local health district or department, extension, your contractor, and you know, state agencies that may have that information. So you know, you call a state geological survey in your state and ask about the area you live in, and they'll be able to tell you, or have someone who can help you understand the geology and maybe, you know, where your well's set, where your water's coming from, all those sorts of things. So today, though, we're really here to talk about funding and financing for private wells. And, you know, there are a number of costs associated with being a private well owner, which I've listed here. Not only drilling your well or replacing your well or water system components when they need it, but sampling your water regularly to make sure it's safe, as well as protecting your well by managing your septic system, abandoning old unused wells that might be in the area, and adding treatment where needed if you have a naturally contaminant. So, or in some areas you may be in, as far as treatment goes, you may be in a karst topography where there's really no way not to have bacteria problems in your well water. And so if you want to maintain your well, or if you want to keep drinking well water, you need to add some kind of continuous disinfection, just like you would if you were on a surface water system or on a spring. So, and also there's regular maintenance and upkeep. And the issue we find is that, you know, many well owners really don't understand these responsibilities, which is why most people have not ever tested their well. And, you know, you need to understand the risks there. And even though, you know, rural attitudes are such, I grew up in a rural area. I know my dad always felt like our water was better than city water. He used to say, it doesn't have those chemicals in it that they put in city water, so it's got to be better, which is, you know, just the opposite of what's true. And so our well was probably always contaminated as I was growing up, to be honest. So a little bit about construction. So what we found, and we work with a lot of well owners all over the country, is that really there's two issues that keep popping up and tend to be the majority of problems with wells. And the main one is poor well construction. So someone has a property, or they've had this well. You know, the well I grew up on, my grandpa hand dug in 1933. Was it safe? No. Whenever we had rain, our water turned cloudy. And so it was definitely influenced by surface contamination. And, you know, that's a risk. It always is. But well construction codes in most states, you know, have only been around for the last 30 or 40 years, and some states much less than that. And so no one was told they had to drill a new well if their well didn't meet code. And so we still find wells that are in pits in northern climates, which is, you know, keep the lines from freezing. We still see hand-dug wells that are in use, like the one I grew up on is still in use. And also these wells were grandfathered in, so they're not safe. And that's one good reason to consider, if you have an old well like that, why you should sample regularly, especially for coliform and nitrate, because that indicates a pathway into your well, as well as bringing your well up to code if you can, so that it is protected at the surface. Because most of the problems with well water aren't because of the groundwater that's where your water is coming from. It's because your well's not properly protected at the surface, and so things can get in the shallow area around your well. And so if you have livestock nearby, or your septic's too close, or you know, you're storing things near your well that can get into the ground, if your well's not properly protected and sealed, those things can get into your well water and cause a problem. These are two extreme examples, I realize. The first one on the left is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. They have a blog, and they are the agency that regulates drillers and well construction in the state of Washington. And they put a bunch of pictures. I got this a number of years ago, but I've got a number of pictures from their blog of people who have died or fell in a well in Washington State. Here, this piece of plywood broke, and the woman fell in, and it killed her. But if you look at this is a little well house. There's old insulation around the outside edges, and that piece of concrete was over the hole in the plywood. It's just, there's an old siphon there, and you see the broom up in the corner. Anything could get in this well. Mice, any kind of insects, it's just not a safe situation, and that's a pretty thin piece of plywood, and clearly was not a good idea to walk on top of that. But this is a poorly constructed well, and it needs to be sealed properly at the surface and have a cap that doesn't allow those things to get in the water. And the well on the right, that's a goat. You can see its ribs. That's a pretty disgusting picture. There's a concrete tile on top of an old brick well here, and this is a well out at a farmstead in southern Illinois that really wasn't used anymore, which is how the goat got in there and no one noticed. But we've pulled frogs out of wells. I'll show you in a picture later of in the well abandonment section about with a horse that got stuck in a well. And the same way with well pits. They're just, a lot of times they have a cover that's not sealed, so if you get a big rainstorm, that whole pit can fill up with water, and then unless your well is sealed really well with the cap and everything is sealed, airtight, if you will, that's going to get into your water, into your well water. So what should you do? If you have a well like this, you try to extend the pipe to the surface if it's in a pit, and then fill the area in with clay grout and install pitless if you need to, if you're in a colder climate. But bring it up to code is the bottom line if you can, and make sure the area around the surface around your well, land surface, is properly protected, because that's where the most risk is of something being able to get into your well, is if it's not, if there's a way down into along the casing or whatever, so that it so those materials can get down into the water. One of the things, since this is a funding and financing webinar, a number of years ago, Katie had just randomly, we got on NGWA's website where they list drillers in every state that are part of their association, and she called randomly 6 or 7 down in Nebraska here and asked, for 300-foot well, we actually asked for steel casing, but some didn't use steel casing except to seat the well in bedrock. And what would it cost? So you can see there's quite a range from $5,700 up to $20,000. And from those folks we contacted a couple years ago, I was talking to the Water Systems Council, Margaret Mertens, the other day, and she mentioned some of the wells they've installed recently for the Water Well Trust were about $14,000. And then in California, since the drought, there's been there's a 6-month or longer backlog to even get a well drilled these days because of the drought they had over several years. And these are deeper wells than 300 feet, but in excess of $40,000 to put a well in out there. And so it's, there's a big variety of costs depending on where you're at. And so, it's kind of it's a market situation. It depends on how many drillers there are, how many wells need to be drilled. All those things all influence how much they might cost. But it's a significant expense regardless. And this all plays into the rest of what we're going to talk about, which is financing options that may be available to you and that sort of thing. So before I go any further, I want to acknowledge a few people who are really experts about these issues. Derek Jones is a community program specialist at USDA. He runs the household water well program for USDA, and so he participates and provides funding to nonprofits around the country so that they can loan money to well owners for fixing their wells. And so a ton of experience, and I picked his brain a number of times, as well as Margaret Mertens, who's the executive director of the Water Systems Council, and she's also program director for the Water Well Trust, which is an organization that installs wells for free for people who qualify and are a real hardship situation. And Cindy Elliott is a loan officer with the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. They're one of the recipients of the USDA grant program, so they get money from USDA that they can then loan out to well owners. And RCAC is one I showed on that map. They're the Western RCAP affiliate, and their program covers 13 states, which I'll probably mention more than once here. So as far as funding issues, again, as I tried to explain earlier, well owners are individually responsible for managing their water supply, period. And so, there are no programs like for community water supplies because they're required by law to meet certain water quality constraints. You can't have arsenic over 10 in a public water supply, and some of those things. There are a lot of funding mechanisms that have been made available through Congress to help with infrastructure upgrades and things like that for community water supplies. Well, there is no such thing for individual water supplies, but USDA, through this program I just mentioned, has kind of a quasi-national program for providing funds to well owners with low-interest loans. And, it hinges on who applies for the grants to get the money to provide for loans, and which is why it's not, really a national program, because a lot of folks just don't have the wherewithal. A lot of nonprofits don't have the wherewithal to get into the loan business. And so it's kind of, it varies. It's an annual program, so it changes every year where some of that funding may be available, and I'll explain that in a minute. But there are a lot of local programs for assistance, and sometimes these are state programs, and I don't mean for necessarily a loan to re-drill your well, but maybe for upgrading, fixing your septic, for abandoning old wells, or for testing. And so we're going to go through some of those just to give you an example. And when I called a bunch of stormwater conservation districts around the country earlier this week to ask if they had a well abandonment program or they'll cost share. And I ran into, in the state of New York, their soil and water conservation district said, they don't do cost shares for things like that because it's a private property issue. So there are rules in New York, or statutes in New York, that limit their soil and water conservation district from doing some of those things, and there may be that in other states as well. Yeah, and all those things are expensive. Treatment, septic systems, well repair, and so they're, it's really an issue because a lot of folks just don't have that kind of extra money or don't budget for it properly, and something they need to consider. So there are really three types of resources available, and they do vary greatly, and I'm going to go through some of those. There's loans, there's cost-sharing programs, and then in very limited, usually income and age-based situations, there may be grants. And I'll go through all of those as we move forward. So the first program I really want to talk about is the Household Water Well System grants that USDA provides, and this is Derek's program, which he's listed there as the contact, to nonprofits. So this isn't something a well owner can apply to, but a well owner would apply to the recipients of these grants. So they're really funding to allow nonprofits to be loan officers and provide those resources to well owners. And those details, you can look this up by Googling it, Household Water Well System Grants and at USDA. So the grants to nonprofits, they allow them to establish a loan program, and there's a 10% match requirement, which means that the loan program, so I'll use RCAC as an example since they have one, they have to provide 10% match of their own funding to get the grant that allows them then to give resources to well owners. So they can be used to construct, refurbish, and service household well systems, which is to repair or replace. I believe they can be used for treatment. I forgot to ask that question directly as well. If you need, especially if you have a contaminant in your water that is a health risk, I believe that you could also use it to upgrade your system with treatment. The Farm Bill was just passed in January, I think, or maybe December, and it's a 5-year appropriation, and it added septic systems to this program. But there's a lot of things that need to get updated and changed, and all the rules need to be put in place. And so talking to USDA, it'll probably be sometime next year in 2020 when that actual funding becomes available. So folks looking for help with septic systems, it's coming. It'll just take a little while to get everything in place. And also, the current amount you can borrow was 11%, or was 1% interest of $11,000 at a max, and the Farm Bill increased that to $15,000. But again, all of those things will be rolled out at the same time, sometime in 2020. So, and again, I just want to emphasize that for this program, homeowners go to the grant recipients for the loans and not to the USDA. A little more information about that. These grants are available nationwide to nonprofits, but Many of the organizations who apply are doing so to support their area, their local region, or a number of counties, or maybe in their state. Very few are more than one state in capacity. Actually, there's only two, and I have those listed here, CERCAP and RCAC, which are both RCAP affiliates. So the program's kind of scattered throughout the country, and because these grants are annual, sometimes the locations change. So for instance, the Water Well Trust, I put Georgia here, and I was supposed to put Arkansas. I see I made a mistake on the slide. Right now, the Water Well Trust is working in Arkansas, but they worked previously in Georgia. Every year when they apply for this funding, they go to where they think the most need is, where they get requests for information or requests for wells, and they're trying to work on a more targeted area. So they usually pick one state, and actually only some counties in each of those states, and that's where they have the capacity to do that. It is, as I mentioned, it's a national program, but it's not everywhere, and it's not even in every state. It's not necessarily in every county. And I think the variants of those rules would be CERCAP, which works in those 5 states that are listed, and RCAC, which works in 13 western states, and you can get that information off their website. So, and next year this will change, and so what we're going to do is try to keep a list of this stuff updated, and RD, which is part of USDA's rule development, plans to have this on their updated website, which they're working on right now too. Okay, so just as an example, this is a flyer for RCAC's Household Water Well System Loan Program. So they've received funding from USDA as a grant to provide $11,000 loans with a 1% interest rate to well owners in the 13 states they represent as their service area. And you can see the rules here, and I got all this information from Cindy Elliott. But their program's unique in that their board, RCAC itself as an entity, because $11,000 doesn't go that far in some of the western states. I mentioned New Mexico and California, how high they are. They've internally decided to add a $7,000 bump to that. That's their own funding, and they loan that at 1 to 3%, depending on the ability of the loan person to repay. So you can borrow up to $18,000 through their program, and all the details are there, and you can also go to their website and see all that. And this is just an example. They do cover 13 states, which is wonderful, and we need to see more groups like RCAC who have the wherewithal to do this on a larger scale. The other group I want to mention, I mentioned already, is the Water Well Trust, and Margaret Mertens, who is the Executive Director of the Water Systems Council, is their Program Director. And this Families with New Wells on the right side here actually is a scrolling bar where they list all the folks they've helped. And you can see in May they'd reached 100 wells. This started in 2012. That most of their funding comes from the grant they get from USDA, but they also have other groups like Xylem or other companies who may donate some funds, or they may have a foundation that may donate some funds to allow them to work in a specific area. I know, if you have a really hard-shaped case where someone is without water, you can apply to them, and they will look at that and decide whether or not it's something they can do. And again, they can't put in 1,000 wells a year, but they are available to help those that really need it the most, and it's an opportunity for some folks maybe to have a new start with their home and a good well. So a little bit more about the HWS program. It's only for residents, and I spelled that wrong, didn't I? It should be residents. Meaning businesses and organizations can't apply. So one of the questions I got was, can a small rural church apply for this funding? They need a new well. And the answer to that is no. It needs to be a permanent residence where families living. And so small businesses or nonprofits like a small rural church that may not be large enough or have enough of a congregation to warrant being a non-community water supply by definition of the Safe Drinking Water Act, they're kind of in the middle there. They're on their own, at least through the USDA program. So it's only for wells. One of the other questions we got was, can you get funding for springs or cisterns? and it does not support those types of water supplies. And as far as I wanted to mention, the reason for the piecemeal coverage for this program, as the GA example, there's 2 nonprofits in Georgia that were listed on that previous slide, and both of those only work in a number of counties, but they have very small staffs. They're small nonprofits that are kind of like a community action agency in their area, trying to improve their local area, and so they've applied for funding that allows them to help folks in the counties they serve, and that's typically the case with this program. And so that's why states like Illinois right now aren't covered with anyone doing this kind of work. Hopefully that'll change in the future. So one thing you can do as a well owner is contact your community action agency and find out if they have any cost share programs or anything else, and let them know about this USDA program. USDA is interested in finding more grantees so that more of these dollars can be used to help support well owners. And if you are a nonprofit who is considering getting into this type of a program, what I suggest is you talk to one of the current grantees and also to USDA about the details and find out how the program works. And I'm sure they'd be very helpful and help you understand if it's something you might want to do. So what I wanted to get across from all that is, whether you're a professional working with well owners or a well owner yourself, we all certainly welcome a better national coverage and the opportunity for well owners who really need it to have access to loan or grant funds for their wells. So there's also a program called the USDA Single Family Housing Repair and Loan and Grant Program. Now this is it's meant for very low income families. I think that to be 50% of the median income in the area, and it can be used for anything for a home, not just a well or treatment or septic, but also things like windows, roof, anything home related. And if over age 62 and you don't have the ability to pay, they offer up to $7,000 in grant funding, which means you don't have to pay it back, and then an additional up to $20,000. I think it's additional, it might be 20 total, of a loan at 1% for up to 20 years. So this is a program that you as a homeowner would apply directly to USDA for. And again, they've got a lot of information on their website that where you can go in and it'll tell you whether where you live qualifies for some of these programs, or you can figure out their RD office. Every state has a USDA office, and if you go to the state office, they can give you information about whether you would qualify for this program. And this is that web page, and you can see have a family income below 50% of the median area income. There's grants for age 62 or older if they can't repay, and there's a button there you can click on for checking the address of their home to determine eligibility. And so it's something you can look into, and it used to be called the Section 504 program, if you're familiar with those things. And yeah, you can Google this as well and get to their website. I'm going to mention it several times. Oh, right here, the last bullet. We're trying to put all these resources together on a page that will be on the privatewellclass.org webpage. We haven't got it done yet. It'll be a week or two. But once we have it ready, we'll try to have all of these links on there that we use today. And what Katie will do is send out an email to everyone that registered. So whether you actually participated or not today, which typically whenever you have a webinar, about half the people who register for a webinar show up. Everyone who registered will get an email with a link to that page, so you'll have access to these resources. So in emergency situations, that was asked, several people asked questions about what do I do in an emergency. So I contacted the Texas Well Owner Network because they've went through 2 hurricanes in the last 3 years, and what they've learned is that there is support from FEMA. It may be a little complicated to figure out, but depending on the type of disaster which the hurricanes would qualify for, FEMA's there. They have a rep whose job is really to work with individual homeowners versus those that help communities and other things. And so, if that kind of thing happens, there should be a way to find those folks. It's called an individual assistance FEMA rep for those situations. And if it's not a disaster that would include FEMA, or they would not be involved, if it's not big enough or whatever, it's not considered a disaster at that point, then really it would just be your regular programs if there are any in place. And so, some states do have programs in place that are just meant for emergencies, so that if something happens, you can contact them and they've got a fund available to help. Others, like California, I'll talk about that in a minute, has a program that's in response to their drought that helps well owners in their state. So, and one thing I do want to mention is I'm going to show a lot of different types of organizations that provide local support or state support, but we've only found a few of probably what's out there. And if we don't mention a state or an organization that provides some sort of funding or grants or cost share, please email us and let us know, and we'll try to add it to that page. But we're going to go through some of the examples of what you need to look for. And I probably don't say it enough in this presentation, but you as a well owner, you need to be inquisitive. You need to go out and look online. You need to make phone calls and find out whether your area has things. Because there's things I even realized I left out of this presentation after I got it ready. Like New Mexico has a program for registering your septic system. If you'll register your septic system, they will give you a free water test. And I did not include that in this talk. So, there's a lot of things like that out there. You just have to find them. And we're trying to help with that. So, so I mentioned the RCAC they have this other program that's just for California, and it's meant to deal with emergencies. And in this case, this program it's up to $45,000 is available as a grant for a private well if your well went dry. And that's the context that it was presented to me anyway. So it's not for new homes, or it's not for construction for small water systems, but it's meant to help if your well goes dry, which a lot of wells in California went dry over the last 4 or 5 years. And so there's programs like this one in California related to emergency response, and this was done in response to the drought, not in advance of the drought. But there are other states like Minnesota, through their housing folks, have this rehabilitation loan, emergency access loan program, and so it will help you get a low interest loan in Minnesota, and you have to be a Minnesota resident. Same thing, there's an emergency repair program through the Tennessee Housing Development Agency that'll give you an opportunity to, for septic and well, I believe. And so you just need to look for these things, but as we find them, we're going to add them to our site, and we'll try to make it as available as possible. Even for livestock. So Wyoming has a program through their USDA office where if you have a livestock well and it's gone dry or there's been some issue, you're able to apply for 75% cost share for a water well or drought measures. As it says here, I highlighted that for livestock wells. And so, and I know that's available in a few other states as well. I didn't pursue it too much because that's not our focus. With our program, it's really private drinking water wells for folks who have a residence. So there are a number of other programs, and I'm going to go through 15 or 20 of those maybe here, and they're really related to these first five bullets. There's aggregated information for help, and I'm going to mention a couple websites that have things. There are, in some states there are special interests, or one is a national program for a specific class of folks, and then there are a ton of well abandonment programs, specifically cost share programs, because a little bit about well abandonment, I'll mention that in a few minutes, but there are probably as many abandoned wells that aren't used that are a risk both to the source water or aquifers, as well as being a safety risk for people who may fall in, or livestock that may fall in, or contaminants or chemicals, or somebody may dump things in, as there are actual drinking water wells that are in use. So well abandonment's a big issue. and it needs to be addressed. And no matter where I go in the country, I run into folks, especially at state agencies, who tell me that, you know, there's so many abandoned wells that show up and someone gets hurt or a little kid gets killed or whatever, because there's so many of them out there. So also septic systems and resources that are available for that, especially in areas where there's vulnerable source water protection issues like out east. And then water testing, which is something we always get asked about. Water testing programs, you know, there's no national program for any of these things for testing their septic systems or well abandonment. Most of them are done locally or sometimes at a state level. So as I mentioned, we plan to create a page with all of this information. And again, I just want to mention that if you're a well professional or a sanitarian or an educator and you know of any programs that we don't talk about today, please email us and give us that information so we can add it. There's a couple sources I'm going to show here, and they're not regularly updated, and so some of it's stale information or the links don't work. And so hopefully we can do a little better job of making sure that the information we provide is actually updated and has some useful content. So, and again, I'll also mention, as a well owner, you need to research this stuff online and figure out what might be available to you based on where you live. And it just takes a little work, not even a lot of time, especially if you're only looking in one area. So, so this is one of those sources, the National Environmental Services Center. NESE, this page, I don't think it's updated much anymore. There's about 6 or 7 links here for different states where they further down this page where it has information on funding programs for private wells and septic, and 2 or 3 of the links didn't work, but the others did. And so, but it's a good source. You can Google this to find it under NESE's website, or wait till we have our page up. And, there's a lot of different topics here. You could click on any of those 8 blue boxes and find information related. So it's, in its day when this was more active, this NESE information was really useful and had a lot more there, I think. And but it's still like a list of federal programs and things like that. So I did want to mention it. And some states have taken upon themselves, Minnesota Department of Health, I know I'm a cheerleader for them a lot, but honestly, they deserve it. They do a lot of great things for the residents in Minnesota. They've got a lot of resources they put towards making things like this available. You can go to this grants and loans page, and the first one listed there in that table is actually the USDA program, but then they have some of their own. And the 4th one listed there, the Ag Best Management Practices, is for rural landowner, farmer, and ag facility septic system replacement and repair, just because there's so much of an issue with nitrate problems and things like that in agricultural areas. So they do a really good job of putting all this information up there. If you're a Minnesota resident, there's likely a program for you to do things with your well. Even, and I think I show an example of one of the counties that has a really great website, and they're really proactive at providing information. As far as specialty interests, I'm going to show 2. This is the Texas Veterans Home Improvement Program, and I know those letters are all small there, but both water wells are listed. If you've already had a well, it means you already have to have a water supply, and sewage system, septic tank replacement of existing, are listed here, as well as a bunch of other things. So if you're a veteran in Texas, you can go through this program, and you may be eligible for these Title I improvements. And that's just for the state of Texas. This is the Colonias Program, which, if you're not familiar with Colonias, they're those in Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas, mostly along the Mexican border. There are areas where a lot of folks still don't have indoor plumbing. They're very poor areas, economically disadvantaged, and so there's a program through USDA to support those folks, and if they own and occupy their property, to give them grant funds to either hook up to a service line or improve their situation so that they have even have a bathroom, as it says here in this first paragraph. As far as abandoned wells, I wanted to talk a little bit about those before I show you any resources. The problem we have is that well logs weren't required in most states until the 60s to the 80s. And because of that, there are more undocumented wells on file, more undocumented wells than there are on file. And in some states, like New York, they didn't pass a law requiring well logs to be filed until 2000. And in other states, they have other kinds of rules, like there's one state that has a rule that says if it's 5 inches or less diameter, you don't need to file the log. So almost every private well in that state is 5 inches or less. And so they have many counties where they don't have any logs for the county, even though there's a lot of private wells. And so it's things like that. And actually in 2 states, Alaska and, which is working on changing that, by the way. Alaska's really, they put a task force together. They're really working diligently to try to change the rules in Alaska to make it more, so that information is gathered. In Pennsylvania, there's no well construction code, and they don't license drillers. And so, that's a risk as well. So there's all these issues either with well construction or abandoned wells. And what I tell folks, and what you should know if you're a well owner and you have an abandoned well, it's a huge liability. If someone falls in that, whether they're trespassing or not, you're likely to get sued, and it could cost you your property. Or someone gets hurt or killed, or it contaminates an aquifer because someone dumped something in that old well instead of filling it in and sealing it properly. So it's really important, and I can't stress that enough, that if you have an old dug or any kind of abandoned well that's not being used, you should seal it. And that's why there's so many programs out there on a local level, like through water conservation districts and things like that, that provide that information. Okay, so I show this example in a lot of the presentations we give on abandoned wells. Again, the 2 pictures are both from the Washington State Department of Ecology from their blog. And one, there's a horse they're trying to get out of that well, and the other one on the bottom, the guy fell 45 feet into the well and he came out unscathed. So pretty lucky. But these newspaper clippings are all from the 90s. And some of you who are old enough will remember Jessica McClure when she fell in a well. It was only an 18, I think it was a fairly small well. She was stuck in it. It took 18 hours to get her out or something like that. And it was covered nationally on CNN, and it really brought that issue to the forefront back then. And they went overnight, and they finally rescued her. And these other 3 are all from Illinois. And back in the 90s, before the internet was it was so easy to find information, the woman who died in Springfield, probably the people who were in Galesburg or up in the Chicago area in Buffalo Grove, had no idea the other events occurred, even though they were all about the same time. And it just, information now is so available. It's still a common occurrence. And so these wells are dangerous. A lot of times we don't even know they're there. The well with a goat in it, that was an old farmstead. Someone was just traipsing through and found that goat was in there. So they're really a risk, and you should do everything you can to seal them. So as far as well sealing or well abandonment, there are a lot of local entities like Water Conservation Districts, or this is a county that provides, this is in Minnesota. This county actually has developed this webpage, Know the Flow. They've got all kinds of events that they do. This particular blog post is from 2015, but these wells, you can get them, you can contact people and get them abandoned. It's a cost share program. And, it's just, you need to look and see if this might be where you live. And, that's the only way you're going to find it. And again, they're mostly local scale. This particular one is from the University of Nebraska. Nebraska has 96,000 irrigation wells, and they've caused, because of all the agriculture and the aquifers are fairly shallow, there's a lot of nitrate problems there. But they've also, these abandoned wells can also be a real source for contamination getting into an aquifer. So they've got a cost share program through UNL, University of Nebraska at Lincoln, to actually, through extension, to take care of that. And this is, I wanted to show this one. This is actually for Door County, Wisconsin, and through the Stormwater Conservation District. But if you look at the additional comments in the middle of the page in Section B, the cost share rate is 90%. So, you know, if it's $1,000 to abandon your well, it's going to cost you $100. And that's an extreme example. Most are a cost share up to a certain amount. So I know right now the county I live in, Champaign County in Illinois, they have a cost share well abandonment program, but it's based on funding that's provided through the Department of Ag and the state legislature. And so right now they don't have any money to give out. But when they do, they provide up to a $750 match. So if it's, as long as it's under $1,500 to do a well abandonment, which usually it's much less than that, you're only paying 50%, and they'll match the other 50%. As far as septic systems, again, as I mentioned, especially out east, there's a lot of water quality issues and a lot of septic issues because of the number of people that live out there, as far as trying to protect watersheds and, you know, the Chesapeake Bay and things like that. So here, this is a program for protecting the New York City watershed west of the Hudson River, and so they have a program about fixing septic tanks that have collapsed and things like that. So again, depending on where you live, if you're having issues with your septic system, there may be relief for you. And, you know, this is Massachusetts, which again, Massachusetts actually has one of the most aggressive programs for decentralized wastewater, which are septic systems mostly, in the country. And they have passed some rules. There's inspections of everything. There's construction standards that are really aggressive so that they're protecting their watersheds and their groundwater. And so they have a number of programs where in a local area, in a community area, you can develop a management plan, and then from that you can eventually get to a point where those approved plans can be used then to give loans to homeowners. And it's really a great thing as far as protecting groundwater and the environment and watersheds. So this program, if you scroll down the page, you eventually get to this betterment loans to homeowners, and it's to renovate systems, hooking up to sewer lines if it's more appropriate, or replacing with Title V systems. And they've got it's called Title V. That's the statute, I think, that has all this information in it. But, you know, there's a lot of alternative wastewater systems today that are basically like a small community wastewater system for an individual. Rather than a traditional septic system, it's got its own treatment, or it's anaerobic or aerobic, and those things then the water that comes out of it is much cleaner, and it doesn't have the nitrates and phosphorus, and, you know, it's just better for the environment. So they've really been proactive. They're actually a good example for what a number of other states should follow that have these issues. But you as a homeowner can use this program and work with your community. And the reason it's done by community here is, you know, in Illinois we have counties, we have county health departments, and they deal with folks in the entire county. In Illinois, our Illinois EPA deals with community water supplies. Our Department of Public Health deals with non-community water supplies and private wells. And so at the county level, they're working with private well owners and non-community systems. In Massachusetts, for example, their counties don't have health departments. They're local health districts based usually in a community, and then they have a service area that goes outside into the country surrounding that community. So where Massachusetts is about a fifth the size of Illinois, we have maybe 90 health departments in Illinois, county health departments. Massachusetts, which is 1/5 the size, has over 380 local health districts, and each of those then have responsibility for their area. So it's just set up differently legally, the way the structure of local rules and who does what, and what role the county has versus the local health district has. and so it's a much different situation to deal with. This is a program, another program for West Virginia, and many of these are done through their housing authority or development fund or development board, and that's because those programs are typically set up to provide assistance to low-income folks. And so it's a mechanism that's already in place by statute, and so it's a better way for them to provide those sorts of resources. Okay, and then I mentioned Minnesota a number of times, but this was the ag program I mentioned earlier, and this is really for, as it says, farmers, rural landowners, and ag supply businesses. And again, it's to reduce runoff, prevent other pollution problems, and provide a way then you can upgrade your septic using this program. One other one, again through another housing authority. This is for Pennsylvania, but it it's a loan program that has a low interest rate and a long term, so that you can borrow the money you need to fix what might be wrong with your water or septic system. This is actually just for septic. It's for either for your septic system or to connect to a public sewer. As far as sampling, these are even more all over the map, if you will. And you really, to find out, I mean, we have things as small as, I know our Tazewell County Health Department in Illinois offers free water testing the week of Groundwater Awareness Week, which was 2 weeks ago, I think it might have been last week. Otherwise, there's a fee. But like in Florida, the way the Department of Environmental Protection has a program for private well sampling, it's really meant to look at where there's contaminated drinking water sources, and these are typically, can be industrial contaminants or pollutants which migrate in an aquifer. So they'll go in and they'll sample these homes, and if you want your well sampled, you can do that, but then you have to agree to the terms that they provide at the end. The best option is outlined in assistance options. Excuse me. And they're really trying to make sure that folks aren't drinking water that's contaminated by ag chemicals or other kinds of chemicals. And there's a number of areas where there's a lot of private wells in a concentrated area, and they've actually come in and put in city water supply for the whole area because the aquifer is just contaminated there. But that's one way to get some sampling done. In Florida, there are a lot of conservation districts or soil and water conservation districts around the country that offer a cost share or testing, and so I'm just showing a couple of those, and I think this one's might be in Montana. I can't remember for sure. Iowa has a great program that it'd be great if other states would do as well. They have a grants to counties program, and this is showing the private well testing part of that. But through their grants to counties program, folks can either get their water tested or they can have their well abandoned, and it will well abandoned. So there's a number of resources. This is through Iowa DNR, which has all this information available. But also they have a state hygienic lab. Boy, excuse me. That has more information about the grants to counties program, and so that way anyone in Iowa who has an issue can work with their county health department to get their water tested. So it's direct funding from the state legislature, and most states don't do that, but in Iowa, that's one opportunity you have there. Again, other soil and water conservation districts. This one's in I believe Minnesota. Yeah, Minnesota, where there is a fee, but they have what they do here is if you go to one of their clinics, they'll cost share the 50%, so the test only costs you $10, and it's a great idea because then it gives them a chance to bring in well owners and give them some basic education about their well, which there's just not enough of that done around the country. As another example of that, a number of state extension groups through the state extension office. This one's at Texas A&M. Have Texas, like this is the Texas Well Owner Network is what it's called, but they do a day session or a 1-hour session where they go around and do workshops, and you can see on the bottom right where the well-informed 1-hour session, the next one's in Hood County on April 8th. But during the year, they do a lot of workshops around Texas, and at all of those, you can get your well tested or screened for, and I don't remember what contaminants they test for, but it's an opportunity then to understand some of the basic issues they have in Texas and give well owners a chance to ask questions. And there's a number of state extension offices that do this. Virginia, Pennsylvania, Mississippi State, Rhode Island, Arizona. There's a few more that have, really active well owner programs. So if you should check that out and see if it's available in your state. They may be able to do sampling. I know Virginia Tech does sampling not only in Virginia but in other areas. During the flooding in Texas and Florida, they had a separate grant to help do testing in those areas after the flooding last year. I wanted to show this one just because, and this is the bottom half of the web page, but I think this is a great idea, and this is really geared toward any health department or anyone who has a local area where you're interested in understanding your water quality better. Their program reimburses a well owner $25 if they'll provide them their sampling results. So the well owner goes out and gets their well tested. Then if they were willing to share those results with this conservation district, they'll give you $25. And the advantage there, if you're like me, interested in what the general water quality is of an area or trying to understand what issues there might be in an area, and this is in Montana, then you can build a data set of what the water quality is. And so it's really a great idea. It's something that to me, a lot of counties or local health districts should consider doing, or anyone else involved with private wells, because it's an opportunity to better understand your water quality. And on the total far end of that, we have states like New Jersey, which passed a law nearly 20 years ago that require a water sample be collected for any property being sold that has a private well. And it's required by law, and the state lab comes out and collects a sample and does the analysis, and it's for an entire suite of chemicals. And in the end, the buyer and the seller are the only two that get to see the results. But they have a database now they collect about 13,000 samples a year. And because of that, over the last 20 years, now they have well over 200,000 high-quality water test results that have given them the ability to map where they have concerns with naturally occurring contaminants, where there might be, man-made contaminant issues, where the water, they know everything there is to know about their groundwater, which is really awesome. And from the standpoint of being able to protect it and understand what issues there might be. And the last one I want to show here is this is Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District in Indiana, and very similar to a lot what the others do. They will cost share or do a screening, and they do charge for some of those things. The charges are over there on the right, but it's subsidized. But they also offer a free well assessment. And I'd mentioned earlier that RCAP funds the work we do for the private well class, and they're our partner on the private well class program. And so this assessment that they're offering through Great Lakes Rural Community Assistance Program, which is the Midwest RCAP that goes from Ohio, includes about 9 states, I think. So Great Lakes RCAP does these assessments for free to any well owner. So you can contact them. They'll schedule a time. They'll try to do a number in a close proximity of an area, and they'll come out and work with the well owner for an hour or two and go through the information they have for that and explain. It asks questions about. It's like a vulnerability assessment. What's near your well, what kind of geology you have, how is your well constructed. They look up a log if it's available, and really it gives them an opportunity to work with the well owner one-on-one and say, here's what your risks might be if there are any, and here's some best practices you should follow, and all these things that you have a well expert basically at your disposal for an hour or two to talk through the issues related to your well. And they're not selling anything. They're just trying to provide you with an assessment, and it's all free. It's funded through US EPA, and it's an opportunity to learn more about your well. And so I highlighted this last because they've developed this partnership where the Conservation District does the sampling part and RCAP comes in and does the assessment part, and it really gives the well owner a lot of good information about their well between the two. So yeah, just a little bit more about the assessment tool. It's really like a sanitary survey. So if you, a sanitary survey is a kind of a vulnerability assessment on a community water supply or a regulated water supply, a public water supply. And it's like doing one of those assessments for a private well, but it's only for the well owner. It's not provided to anybody else. And it gives you a chance to educate the well owner about their specific situation. As I mentioned earlier, you know, every well is different. You run into all kinds of unique situations. And if you've ever looked at a series of pictures of private water wells, you see everything under the sun, from a really well-constructed one to the ones some of them might shown today. But it also then encourages communication, and it gives the well owner a chance to ask questions and also understand that there are folks in their area that they can go to, and the RCAP person will know who those are, so that you know, the next time they have an issue or they have a question, there's someone locally who can help them. Because, you know, from where I sit, I help well owners from all over the country, but many times that is me finding someone locally for them, just because, you know, I don't work in every state and I don't understand the geology in every state, nor could I ever manage to do that. So it's really, you know, our national program really works at a local scale that way by working with partners and developing all those partnerships like Great Lakes has done with Hamilton County. Quickly, I want to do a little bit of information about our private well class if you're not familiar with it. This webinar is really meant to support those 10 lessons that we have. This is not the class. When you go to privatewellclass.org, you can sign up to take our class. It's self-paced. It's 10 lessons. Basically, you sign up for it and give us your email address, and it sends you one lesson a week for 10 weeks. So it's completely self-paced. You're completely on your own to take it if you want to or read through it. It's not meant to, one thing I can tell you is that as a someone who supports well owners in Illinois for the last 30 years, most people call me because they have a problem and they only want an answer. And what we're trying to impress upon everyone is you need to go through this class. It gives you so much background about your well and about issues you might have. It'll help you ask better questions. It may help you solve problems on your own, and it's really worth going to the effort of taking the class. And so that's where we're at. I don't want people just to call me and have me answer their question and then 2 years later they call me back because they have another question. I want them to learn more about their well so that they can take care of it properly, make sure they sample and do all the things they're supposed to. And that's what our class promotes. So this is our front page. You click on Learn by Email on the bottom left, and it takes you to, well, let me back up. There's also this resource, if you look across the top, it says Home, Enrolling Class, Webinars and Events, and Resource Library. Well, you got to this webinar through Webinars and Events probably. We also have podcasts and videos and all that stuff, but to take the class, you click on Learn by Email. But for each of the 10 lessons, we also have under the Resource Library a list of other resources that are available that support the information in that lesson. The lessons are between 6 and 10 pages, and they have figures in them. And some of the figures came out of these actual documents, and some, yeah. And so, but there's more detail in each of these. So if you're really interested in trying to learn more about your situation, one of these may really provide a much better detailed set of information. So for instance, the first one under lesson 2 is the Michigan Flowing Well Handbook. You know, who knew Michigan has a ton of flowing wells, so much so that they created a law that says they have to be capped now. They were losing 28 million gallons a day of groundwater to flowing wells that were uncapped. So, but that handbook has everything in it you'd ever want to know about a flowing well and how to cap it and how to do that properly, and you know, how to take advantage of the pressure that creates whenever you do cap it and all those sorts of things. We do videos, and or we do webinars like this one. We did one in August last year on lead, so what well owners need to know about lead. So that recording, just like the one we're doing today, is being recorded. We'll have a page just like this for our funding video today. It'll be on our website. And along with that, we've created a resource page on lead and the sources that we provided in that webinar, and which is the same thing we plan to do now with this funding webinar, is create a resource page on funding so that all the resources I've shown today will be available, and you can get back to USDA, and if you're in Western state, you can go to RCAC or whoever and learn that information and find out more and who to contact. We also created a series of short videos that are 4 to 7 minutes long on specific topics like what you should know if you share a well. I know one of the questions today was about a shared well. In different states they're handled different ways, but in most states there are no rules. And so what I tell people is you need to have a contractual agreement with the person who has the well that's on their property, or if they decide they don't like you, or if they sell the property to someone who doesn't want to play nice, they can just all of a sudden say, you can't use this well anymore. So if it's not in your deed, if you don't have a contract with the folks who are all sharing the well, you're at risk of one day coming home and not having water. So this is just about things you should know if you're in that situation. And even, how does what is a bedrock well? How does a bedrock well work? Or why does my well keep losing pressure? This just goes through some of the common problems you have when you have a pressure tank, and what might be causing those issues, whether it's a bladder tank and the bladder's got a leak, or whatever might be going on. And again, these are all there's 16 of these videos, and they're all 4 to 7 minutes long. We've developed some podcasts. We have more to do. We have the first 3 lessons of the 10 that are listed there as 1, 2, and 3. They've been very popular. I'm not a podcast person personally, but we've had well over 2,000 downloads of these podcasts, and so it's an opportunity to learn more about our program and those issues when you're driving or working out at the gym or whatever. And the last thing I'll mention is we've developed a completely Spanish language version of our materials. So the 10 lessons and a number of the videos that we have been redone in Spanish. And so if, in a Spanish language area where we prefer to take it that way, it's available. And we get questions probably once or twice a month from someone on YouTube where they've looked at one of our videos in Spanish and they've asked us a question in Spanish, and I have to lean on one of the folks at RCAC who is a native Spanish speaker to help me get those answers and translate back and all that stuff. So, but it works, and we're able to help folks, and that's the whole idea. So the overall goal of our program is really to help well owners, to give them target information and advice so that they understand how important their well is and what investment it is. I mean, it's a car in a lot of cases, and you want to take care of that, and why you should understand how it works, and so that they can protect themselves and their family from risk. And really, what we hope is that they've learned enough of the basics about their well and the geology and the well type and the situation they're in their area, that they know who to ask questions from, whether it's a state geological survey or county health department or whoever, or extension or a contractor, but also to ask better questions because they know enough about their well that they understand how all that works. So hopefully that's what comes across, and we're going to go to the questions that we have now. Most of the questions we got were directly related to funding, and I feel like I already answered them. And but we do have a number of questions that weren't as related or were specific about something that we're going to answer now. And then if you have any questions, I haven't looked to see if Katie has been taking any down. It looks like we haven't got any from the folks in attendance. But if you have any questions, you can go to the chat box or the question box on your GoToWebinar screen, if you will, and you can ask questions there, and Katie's monitoring that. But and also I want to mention again one more time that we are creating a page with all these resources, and whenever we have the URL ready, we'll send it out to all the registered participants, and we'll probably also provide it in our monthly newsletter that goes. And if you're a well owner, our newsletter is for well professionals and folks who actually work with well owners. It's geared toward giving them information that they can use then with well owners. It's not really meant for well owners. And there we go. So treatment funding, is there funding available for adding treatment to your water system? So my understanding is that the USDA water well program, those loans, you can use them for that purpose. But you know, to find out if there's a group, a nonprofit in your area that's actually has those loans available, you need to contact your state RD office, and that's what it'll tell you on USDA's page. And eventually their webpage is going to have a list of all those nonprofits, but they're in the process of redoing that page now, was my understanding. So I do believe it does support funding for adding treatment if it's necessary to your private system. As far as financing, somebody asks, is it worth it? What are the benefits of financing? You know, I'm not a banker, but I know having a home mortgage and some other things, if you can take advantage of one of these programs with an interest rate of 1%, it's definitely going to be worth it if it means that you have safe drinking water or it removes a threat like your septic system or abandoned well, if it removes a threat to your well water quality. Because that's what those things are. They're a threat. You know, if your septic system isn't working properly, or you're in an area where a septic system might influence your well, if it's not working properly, then you definitely need to take care of it. And the only way to know if there's some of those issues may be sampling, but that's sampling should be something that's part of regular maintenance. And if you're going to be on a private well, you need to assume you're going to be doing sampling every year to make sure your water's safe. So yeah, to me it would be more than worth it if it ends up allowing you to have a more peace of mind and a safe water supply. You don't have to worry about what your kids are drinking and all those sorts of things. For tribal financing, we had a question from someone who has who's on tribal lands. So if you're on tribal lands, I contacted the Indian Health Service and just asked them, you know, do they do sampling for private well owners on tribal lands? And basically they said the process would be that you contact your tribal government and then make a request to the Indian Health Service to have a discussion about what kind of assistance they might be able to provide for whatever your well issues are. And you know, they certainly, I've worked with them on a number of tribal lands in the past where there's known water quality issues, and they certainly are willing. We've done a lot of sampling that way, and so you know, that's the approach you need to take. And they're one, hopefully, they should be one source, one additional source. And I'm sure you could also apply for the USDA funding as well, depending on your situation. Someone asked about PFAs, which, you know, please talk about the PFAs crisis that's looming. Is there funding available for testing? You know, I've been in this industry for over 30 years, and there's always another PFA. And I'm not saying that to belittle the problem we have now, because this is the big one. But if you look back, there's been, you know, every 3 or 4 years, there's another thing that comes out that tends to be a crisis. It was lead right after Flint. It was chromium before that. There's just, you know, and EPA deals with those as they can, and they create new rules for testing, at least for community water supplies, and then it's implied that private wells aren't safe if they don't meet those same requirements that are listed in the Safe Drinking Water Act. I looked for anything about specifically testing for PFAs, and I couldn't find anything, at least not in the States. And, you know, there are more and more labs that are gearing up and learning how to test for that, but it's you know, every different chemical has a different process for testing and accuracy and all those things. So there's still work being done on developing those methods. What are issues and aren't issues related to the health effects of PFAs? And so recently the US EPA announced that they are planning to promulgate a rule eventually on a standard for PFAs in drinking water for community or for public water systems. And but that process typically takes 3 or 4 years. So in advance of that, a number of states have created their own rules that are just for community water supplies. And so what I would say is, you know, we know PFAs occur in specific areas. They're more focused. They've been found at near plants where they're used heavily for different types of processes, where there's firefighting foam, almost, you know, so every fire institute, most airports where they do a lot of training on fires that might happen. You know, first someone had said to me not too long ago that, well, you don't have to worry about airports if they've never had a fire. Well, you do, because those firefighters that are there train extensively, so they're prepared, and they use firefighting foam when they do that. So every airport is going to have some of that in the groundwater. So it depends on how close you are to those things, knowing where you live versus where those things may be used. And really the best bet is to call a health professional, call your state health department or lab, and ask them for advice in that respect. So, yeah, that's my advice regarding to PFAS. And more information is going to come out as EPA works on this process and moves through. Like I said, some states have created their own rules already and passed laws. In other states, that's not possible. Like in Illinois, which I didn't know till recently, our state statutes say that we will pass whatever rules the US EPA passes related to the Safe Drinking Water Act, meaning that we can't have a rule on PFAS until the US EPA comes out with a rule for PFAS. So, for instance, in California, the federal rule for arsenic is 10 parts per billion. In California, their state legislature decided to make it 5 to be more protective. We can't do that in Illinois. It's against state statute unless our state legislature and governor decide to change all that. So, yeah, that's where we're at. I have two more to throw in here. My neighbor started with 12 chickens and now has nearly 200. Is this a concern for at 300 feet? So they asked a question at 300 feet. I wasn't sure if they meant 300 feet is where they're getting their water from, or they're 300 feet away. And what really matters here is every situation's different. So if you have a sand and gravel well where the screen is down at 300 feet, it's much less likely to be a problem than if you have a bedrock well that's 300 foot deep and maybe only has 30 or 50 feet of casing, where, and it depends on how concentrated the chickens are. We find wells that are in the middle of a feedlot for a cattle operation, which, makes no sense to me, but it happens. And so, and it depends on what type of well you have and the geology. If you're in, like in Champaign County where I live, we have 2 sand and gravel aquifers above bedrock, and between those is a very thick clay layer that stops almost any water flow from the surface. So if you're in the lower aquifer here, the idea of a surface contaminant getting down into that groundwater is very, very, very minuscule. But you could be in southern Illinois in a karst area where there's sinkholes and caves, and Pike County, Illinois, which is a karst area, 85% of the samples their health department tests have coliform bacteria problems, positives. So there's a lot of factors that go into whether that would be a concern or not, and you need to talk to someone locally that knows the geology, or give us more information. If you want to email us separately, we can look into it and be glad to. But there's a lot of detail that goes into whether that's really going to be a concern or not. And someone asked, how do I find the professional ones for well and treatment professionals? Like, not someone who's trying to sell them a treatment system. And, and it's just what I said here. In any profession, you have a few bad apples, and that's certainly true with water treatment professionals and drillers and, and hydrologists, which is what I am. So you need to do your homework is the bottom line. Get references. For drillers, you can look at NGW's website. They have a list of all the drillers that are master drillers, which means they passed a bunch of extra classes and information, and, ask for references. And WQA is a Water Quality Association, which also does testing for treatment equipment. So they're out there making sure the equipment really work the way they're supposed to. And I didn't go so far as to provide this paper, but I know there was a paper done at Penn State about what you need to be careful of, because there certainly are folks who will sell you treatment equipment you don't need. And to protect yourself from that, there's things you can do, but there's a whole issue there. If you email me, we can probably provide you that paper. So I think I have a copy. But the bottom line is just you need to do your homework and find out what other people think. And these days, if it's a company, that does water treatment, you can go on Yelp or Google and you can find reviews, or some of those other sites that have I can't think of them. I want to say Linden, that's not right, but some of the sites where you can find contractors for doing your basement or doing your roof. There's references, and there's also people who've written reviews. You don't have to necessarily be a member of those sites. I know I did that for my roof. And you can find information about what others in the area have said about their capabilities. So just do your homework. And most professionals are professional. And there's a lot of, we work a lot with the Water Quality Association, and I think they get a bad rap, not them, but the people they represent, because it only takes one or two bad apples to make everyone look bad, and that's what tends to happen. And, most folks are doing their due diligence and making sure that they're not trying to oversell. So that would be my take on that. So that's what I have for today. And it looks like we do have one question, and the question is, what are PFAs? So they're polyfluorinated, I don't know the chemical term, but they're a very widely used chemical. They're used in Teflon coatings, fire retardants. It turns out they're used in many, many processes for industrial applications, and they've started showing up in our groundwater. And the problem is they're very persistent. Some of them don't degrade at all. And so I would encourage you to Google PFOA and PFOS, and you're going to find more information than you could ever imagine on those topics. I know there's a group called the ITRC, the Interstate Technology Regulatory Commission. They're a group of mostly state environmental folks, like at a Department of Environmental Protection, as well as vendors and companies and other groups who formed a work group on the PFAS issue, and they've aggregated a lot of information on all the problems and what we know about PFAS. Like I said, it's enough of an issue that some states have went ahead and passed their own regulations on limiting it in drinking water supplies. And whether it's really a crisis or not, it certainly is if you're in an area where it's there. There are treatment options for it that aren't completely clear to me yet. I probably should have looked into that before I got on this webinar today. But, there's more information becoming available and about the health risks. And if you go to the ASTDR, I think it is, CDC, and the ASTDR is they list all the chemicals and then what kind of issues you might have with them. And I know we have a link to that on our lead page for lead, but you can also get to any other chemical from that. And yeah, it certainly, we're in the middle of, trying to figure out nationwide what we're going to do about all the contamination that's already in groundwater, and especially firefighting foams. So, naval bases and Air Force bases, any place where there's an airstrip, seems to be a lot of it, and as well as companies that may use that in industrial processes. So that's my best explanation off the cuff of what PFAs are. There's a long list of processes that they're used in, though, and things they're used for. They're just really ubiquitous in modern manufacturing and industrial stuff. Okay, well, with no other questions, thank you for attending, and this is recorded, and so it will be available sometime next week on our website. And then the resources page for funding and financing we're working on, and we will get that up as soon as we can. It'll probably be the following week sometime, and once that is ready, we'll send out an email, as I mentioned, to everyone who signed up for this webinar with a link to that page. So thanks for attending, and again, our email address is info@privatewellclass.org if you are interested in CEUs or have other questions. So thanks for your time.